Chapter 36, Crete and the Bronze Age. Crete was the last full flowering of matriarchal culture. We are taught that Western civilization begins with Greece, but in fact, the imagination of the Greeks came from Crete. All Greek religious ritual, all Greek mythology was of Cretan Mycenaean origin. Rites performed at Eleusis were in utter secrecy. In earlier Crete, celebrated in sacred groves. The ecstasy cult of Dionysus originated in Crete. It was the cult of the great goddess, lady of the beasts, surrounded by her wild dancing women. Later at Bacchantes, these ivy-chewing women performed death and resurrection ritual of her son, Dionysus Bacchus. Most of the latter famous Greek goddesses originated in Crete. In fact, the whole progress of classic Greek mythology involved breaking down the one original great goddess into her many aspects and stereotyping these into partial goddesses that we have come to know. Aphrodite, the love goddess, Athene, the goddess of wisdom, Demeter, the mother, Persephone, the daughter, Artemis, the virgin huntress, Hecate, the death crone. In these partial forms, the goddesses were often set at war with each other, as in the Trojan legend when Paris was asked to choose which one of the three, Hera, Athene, or Aphrodite, was most beautiful. His choice precipitated a war. This story is a paradigm of how the Greek male mind in the rising patriarchy played with women and with ancient goddess, breaking her into fragments and then setting the fragments against each other in jealous bickering. Greek mythology is full of this intellectual game, revealing the detachment of the Greek mind from what had once been sacred. Under the original Great Mother religion, this fragmentation could not happen, for each different face of the goddess was recognized as an aspect of the one being. The great goddess of Crete is familiar. Statues show her standing in a flounced skirt with bare breasts, ecstatic, holding up coiling snakes in both hands. She was worshipped among early agricultural peoples of the Mediterranean region in Southwest Asia. In northwest coast of Africa, she was called Ngame. Her cult was perhaps carried to Crete in ancient times by Anatolian settlers from the Asiatic mainland, or it might have originated in Africa or in Thrace. The wonderful flounced skirt was worn by both Maltese and Sumerian goddess. The Cretan goddess is one with the Ephesian Artemis, the many-breasted, the Ishtar of Babylon with the triple goddess Morrigan of Ireland, the Mau Lisa, the black witch carrying the snake in her belly, with the great mother of the Paleolithic caves. She was almost always appeared with serpents with bare breasts and the moon. She was the first god, always one. The great goddess kept her supremacy through the Mediterranean, the Aegean, Turkey, and the Near East, Northwest Africa, Europe through the Neolithic times, until the very end, the Bronze Age, in changing forms. She survived into the rise of high civilization in Crete, when a form of class society developed based on a palace culture of advanced technology, but still patterned on the matrilineal family. There are no figures of male gods in all of Cretan culture. Even into the predominantly patriarchal, warring, priest-ridden world of the Bronze Age, the Cretans, unlike most of their contemporaries, had no temple or temple figures. Their sanctuaries were in the countryside. They worshipped among sacred trees, and even as they celebrated the birth of the young male god Dionysus in the birth cave, he was always known as the son of the Great Mother. The rites involved hiding and protecting him from the cannibalistic wrath of the neighboring father god, who saw him as a rival for power. Dionysus was raised among women, dressed as a woman and as an ecstatic shaman, and he represents the naturally androgynous nature of the true son, who identifies with the mother. As G. Rachel Levy wrote, the Cretans developed a religion unusually detached from formal bonds, but emotionally binding in its constant endeavor to establish communion with the elemental powers. Perhaps this was the reason why they never built temples, but performed their rites through the most splendid epochs of their material achievement on mountain peaks and caves, in household chapters and rustic shrines. Their ritual remained primitive, preserving in its relations with cavern, pillar, goddess, and tree, so that they could draw profoundly on the past and bequeath something fundamental to their more intellectual successors. The Cretans appear to have been gentle, joyous, sensuous, and peace-loving. From the evidence of the ruins, they maintained, like the Maltese Islanders, at least 1,000 years of culture is unbroken by war. The only other peoples we know with such a long peace record, e.g., those of the Indus Valley and of southern India, were also mother goddess cultures. In Crete, the uncovering of the breasts was a sacred gesture, a symbolizing the nourishing life stream of the mother. The goddess was the one, whose godhead, single in essence, but of many forms, with varied rites and under many names, the whole earth reveres. In later times, her young son emerges as a deity, a leader in the embodiment of the war-dancing Curetes. All the Cretan rites included ecstatic dancing and mystery, and in the Dionysian rituals, these trance-inducing activities were not intended to prepare actual warriors, but to defend the spirit of the mother's young son from the rising patriarchy. At the first Indo-European sky god, Zeus was identified with a young Cretan god. Zeus was introduced into the Greek Mycenaean mythology by nomadic pastoral invaders from the north called Aryans by some historians. They could have come from the Russian steppes. Among Greeks, Zeus was first seen as a serpent god, a consort of the goddess and a manifestation of her power. In reliefs and seals, he was imagined as a serpent. When the young Zeus Dionysus was born and concealed in a Cretan cave on Mount Ida, the holy rite of the new birth involved all people in celebration. The Curetes danced and beat their shields, figure-8-shaped shields ornamented with serpents and spirals to help save the child from his devouring father, bent on secular power. All this was an accepted part of Greek mythology, but influenced by the solar cults and the Apollinian rationalism. Classic Greeks elevated the sacrificial son to Olympian immortality, just as early Christians do with Jesus. Eventually, the story of Zeus's birth and death in a Cretan cave as the son of the great mother was denied as heresy by the Greeks. There is a striking difference between the colorfully flowing and curving wall paintings and pottery ornaments of the Cretans and those of the Bronze Age Babylonian places and huge temples, all bearing angular, rigid, and aggressive scenes of warfare, enslavement, and the hunt. These Babylonian architectures were setting a new patriarchal standard that the world was soon to follow. But whatever is gracious and beautiful in Greek art derived not from patriarchal style, but from the early Cretans. At the service of the great mother of Mount Cithaeron in Crete, the whole of creation was believed to stir, live, and dance. The great mother's mountain flame was kept alive by nymphs and torchlight dances and winding mountain processions. There was a ritual feast of raw flesh and a long magical sleep of initiation in the cave, a visionary trance in rebirth. Funerary rites express the concept of rebirth through the mother. Blood sacrifice of the bull was performed by priestesses with ceremonial labrys. The palaces contained pillar crypts where offerings were made, and the pillar of the symbol of the goddess was anointed and perfumed with perfumed oils. In the low, dimly lit throne room of Knossos were stone basins, and the throne was flanked by griffin murals. The palace of Knossos is a vast labyrinth in its design. Labyrinth names its hall of double axes, the ceremonial acts of the goddess. Cretan art and religion were vivid celebration of life. The goddess was joyously worshipped as the Lady of the Beasts. Reliefs, paintings, frescoes, and countless seals depict her on mountaintops surrounded by her wild animals or carrying magic snakes in her uplifted arms. In Cretan homes, walls and ceilings were lavish with flowing lines and bright curves, plants and flowers, birds and forest animals and sea creatures, purple octopi. Cretans were mariners, traveling and trading as far as Scandinavia, Ireland, Syria, and Northwest Africa. Traces of their art and influence were carried over the seas. They worshipped cowrie shells and other vulva-like sea shapes of the goddess. These sea spirals and convolutions were universal symbols of female creation and organic growth, of eternal continuity and change. The cowrie in Africa retained its symbolic value into patriarchal times, being used as money. In Buddhist Tantra, spiral shells are symbols of the root mantra, Om. No one knows what happened to Crete. Its bright millennium of matriarchal culture ended suddenly and mysteriously, with no sign of a cause. There is no evidence of war or invasion. Some believe it ended in earthquake and flood. Robert Graves speculates that Crete was a legendary Atlantis. The Bronze Age marks a revolution in social organization. There was a break in the religion of the megalith builders. The great goddess still ruled, but no longer supreme. Her son Lover became a more and more dominating war god and father god, taking over some of her functions and powers as his busy priests remade the old mythologies into this new image. In this, they had the help of alphabets and script writing invented by women goddess cultures. The transition from matriarchal to patriarchal organization seems to have come about in Mesopotamia as elsewhere through the political social revolt of the queen's consort. She traditionally conferred executive powers on him by allowing him to adopt her names, robes, and sacred instruments and regalia. For example, the widespread custom of the king wearing artificial breasts and long robes, acting as a sacred agent of the goddess. The crown on his head was the crown of birth from the goddess, as babies are still said to have the crown at birth. When the king revolts against his sacred role in order to exploit the secular power of the matriarchal domain, the mother goddess religion begins to be distorted. We see the rise of the father god as secular male usurpation of social, political, and economic power, as well as a rewriting of all the old mythologies. With the decay of the matriarchal cultures, the mystery rites lost their pristine significance as female participation in a female universe. The relation of women worshippers to the young male god, grown from the goddess's infant son to an adolescent to a war god, changes. The relation of son to mother becomes misconstrued as that is a lover to a bride, then a dominating lord to a servant. And the wild women dancing companions of the androgynous Dionysus are legalized into submission, becoming weak and fawning followers of the macho warrior godhead, or a crucified Christ who denies the mother. There was an era before the patriarchal revolution took effect, when women and men cooperated in equality, producing and creating and worshiping together. The son of the mother was her mature lover and mate. Wherever the worship of the Great Mother occurred, ritual emphasis was on the sacredness of life. Sexual union fuses and separate emanations of the divine. And so sexual rites, worship, and ceremonial union, not to be confused with fertility rites, were a part of her mysteries everywhere. The hieros gamos, sacred marriage between a high priestess representing the goddess and the sacrificial year king, later permanent king, is, however, no older than circa 6500 BC, to our knowledge. But the idea of a sacred mating between the new initiates and ritual priestess or priest still lives among some witches. With patriarchy, the ceremonial view of sexual union ends. Patriarchy is based on a secular, not sacred relationship and on property possession, which utterly excludes the experience of ecstatic communion. It is also, of course, based on the sexual passivity, weakness, and dependence of women. The sacred marriage becomes the ugly business of domination and humiliation between the sheets, or in the harem, the male paradise filled with sexual slaves. And now the sacred relation of mother-child is closed indoors, psychologized, and publicly diminished as the child becomes to be viewed like the wife, as part of the father's property, neither having social, economic, or political rights except through him. With patriarchy, we're in a world of male display, with males strutting and boasting before each other, and women and children, as well as religious and cultural artifacts, existing solely as material items in the assembled wealth.